I'm Margaret O'Neill, and it's my pleasure to host this session with Arlen Vernava, who is a deep and wide thinker about all things transitional. And we are recording this session. And so, Arlen, I'll just go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah, hey everybody. Excuse me. I share Margaret's affinity for serving on the faculty, and I wear the education team lead hat as a volunteer for IMN. And I am talking to you from Long Island, New York, Nassau County. I am in Garden City, about 30-minute train ride into Manhattan. Not too far from the Throgs Neck or the Whitestone Bridge, just beyond the Long Island Expressway, the ramp to the Long Island Expressway, and out east. And and my presentation to you is meant to, of course, provoke some thinking, some creativity, some conversation, and perhaps to name a couple of pieces to that. I wonder if we might excavate a little bit the reality of intersectionality, and not just intersectionality as it's defined and used as we all understand it, but rather, or in addition to that, intersectionality as also the confluence of all of those polarities, all of those, on the one hand, for some of us privileges, for some of us not privileges, but where all of the confluence of that lands anytime within a community of faith. It's my contention that because intersectionality is simply a lived normative reality, then that means communities of faith are always in transition, emotional and spiritual transition, around plumbing the depths of that, their response to it, their living alongside of it, so there's that piece. And more and more, I am convinced that what was once historically very, I want to say very, or certainly a clear hedge or boundary between the work of the so-called intentional interim practitioner and the so-called incoming called clergy, that hedge was a high hedge. The roles were clearly delineated. There was, of course, things that they shared, of course, but there was much that they didn't, in a sense, and certainly conceptually they understood, I'm in this lane and you're in that lane. I'm convinced that hedge is opaque, and perhaps it's really more like a very attractive and property boundary where someone has planted a beautiful row of perennials and annuals. So it's very clear that there's this property and there's that property, and also that one can fairly easily step over, and that there is really an expectation that there's a lot of conversation between the two. That's where I'd like to start. I didn't review my talk earlier, so I imagine there might be some other things in there that I'm not remembering right facing forward, but are pertinent because you're still wrestling with them. I'm hoping that the two things I named are certainly key to part of what you took away from that presentation. So just jump in. What bubbles up for you? How would you like to explore this? If there's perhaps one last thing, if there's perhaps any outcomes about this, I wonder if one of those outcomes is that we begin to imagine a shape of those of us who are leaders who practice this during times of transition, that what we are beginning to imagine is how we may formally and informally equip others to lean thoughtfully and intentionally into their work, which is transition also. Ready, set, go.
I'll take a jump. Okay. Having watched your video recently, Arlen, I realized I'm about a decade behind you in ministry. You shared beginning ministry in '85.
Yeah.
So that just naming a gap there. When I went through seminary, it was very much taught that we were just beginning the postmodern paradigm shift, that the church that was coming would not be anything like the church we had experienced, especially in the past decade, which would have been the '80s. Mm-hmm. And that we should begin envisioning new ways to do ministry because the old ways were completing. At the same time, I was at a United Methodist seminary, and so there was an awful lot of reinforcing of the current administration and structures, and you have to know to navigate this particular polity. Now, United Methodists don't really engage transition the same way. Mm-hmm. And I was United Church of Christ in seminary, so I was engaging differently. For me, then, the reality of my professional ministry has always been the church has already shifted and is going to shift even more. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if part of this conversation might be generational difference, generations of pastoral training and being in those different generations. But I know the conversation is also all congregations are now in transition. It's not just the time when a pastor leaves and the next pastor's coming, and congregations are frightened and anxious because suddenly they're having to deal with transition in the times that they would have named as stability. Mm-hmm. 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 So I've jumped in. Hopefully others will follow.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to watch the video, and I'm sorry that I didn't. But I'm interested in Tom saying, 1995 was different than 1985. I graduated from seminary in 2018. So for us, it's really the ministry that you thought was coming, Tom, the new ministry that you thought was coming has come and almost gone for us. And it feels like, but it hasn't. I mean, there's some of it that is ministry, and it has been for hundreds and thousands of years, and some parts of it don't change. And there is a perspective, I think, that comes from being a seminarian in this political climate and in this generation, that gives me a different view on what transitional ministry is. When I came out of seminary, I mean, I'd had 35 plus year career as a lawyer and doing other things. So I wasn't a 20-year-old coming out of seminary, but I had a life. So coming out, I'm like, I'm older. I've lived through all these things, but I have not lived through these things as a minister. And what does that look like? Well, I think I want to go be a settled minister and be happy in a congregation and stay there for 10 or 15 years. And after 4 years, I was gone. And am realizing that transitional ministry these days is not just because the settled minister left, resigned, was asked to leave, whatever. It's because all of a sudden they can't pay a minister, and now what was a 100% time position is now a 50% time position, and they're trying to figure out, how do we get there? Or it's, there used to be 5 churches in the town and now their membership is all down. It's, how do we deal with coming out of COVID and that life is different? Zoom is real. Zoom was here before, but now it's, it seems like it's everywhere. So it feels like everything about ministry is transitional to my cohort of colleagues. And I'm probably an old timer, because I realize there are folks now who are graduating from seminary who were never in person because of COVID. So yeah, I think there's definitely some generational aspects to this, in scary ways and hopefully good ways, but definitely there.
Both of your comments remind me, Arlen, you and I met in person at the last event before everything locked down. It was like within a month, everything locked down.
Yes.
We were there in Florida, and then boom.
Yes.
Since then, it's all been this format here. So if you graduated from seminary in 2018, you have seen a shift, because exactly what you're saying. My son was in law school when everything shifted, and he did most of his law school training on Zoom. So it's a whole different way of figuring this out. And I think the comment, every church is in transition. I mean, you can't get around that. Everybody's trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we do this community thing on screens? And how do we maintain a gospel that is inherently one-on-one kind of communication, and yet here we are. I'm talking to the Brady Bunch square here. How do we do that and still share the love of God through all that? And yet I have found it's very interesting. A little earlier today, I was in one of those breakout groups. It was the same dude I met a couple of years ago from Austria. We were talking again, and I wouldn't have had that opportunity if you go back, a few years ago. So, but it has shifted around. And then how do you kind of roll with the punches like that? So, certainly the ability to be creative is now less sort of an oddity and more. Tom and I were in the one thing together talking about all of our geeky and different kind of proclivities. That's become more of a go-to tool in the toolbox to be able to deal with all these different shifts. So,
do you think it's possible that what we're really doing is coming out of the fog of a false stability, and that we're returning to early church, which had to figure stuff out all the time, everywhere it was, and that maybe we've been living in a cloud from 1940 to 1980, and that wasn't real and wasn't normal, but it was so established in this country as the normative block, and it just isn't, and it never really has been, and that we're really an opportunity to get back to what we would call early church, and it's all over the place, and it's not systemically an organization, it's a ministry.
Can I address that?
Sure.
So I have a doctorate in religious education, and I've tracked patterns, historic patterns. And my observation has been in the last 10 years, we're starting to go back to patterns that were at the beginning of the 20th century. So I think what you're saying is, and here's the way I've been saying it. People are saying we're at a decline of the church, but what we're actually experiencing is the end of an anomaly. And if you take a much longer look at just U.S. Christianity, we're going back to what was normative before the 20th century. That really the whole of the 20th century, but especially the 50s to the 90s, are really distorted. We're going back to smaller congregations, fewer full-time clergy, fewer other religious professionals, increased lay leadership, questions around denominational identity and how essential is it or is it not. These were all pieces that were very much in play at the end of the 19th century.
And yet, it's what people know. It may be an anomaly, but it's what people know. And so it's a huge shock to the system. I graduated in 1990, and I left school expecting to lead change. And instead, I encountered a church that had no idea. And even this huge resistance. And it was almost like watching a horror movie if I step back and just look through the years. And I think it wasn't until COVID hit that people really started to get this idea that everything has changed. And I think there's still a few people who are kind of in denial about that. But I think we have such a huge opportunity now because there's been enough of a disruption that everybody has moved through together, that perhaps there can be a common language around transition and change.
Karen, may I pass the talking baton to you for a moment?
Yeah, I'm also, first I apologize not watching the movie, or the video. But I think it was the title of the workshop, Arlen, which caught my interest, that there are transitions beyond the transitional work I'm doing, right, as an interim, blah, blah, blah. So, yes. And even changing congregations in different settings with different culture made me think very little about the transitional changes around church, around the setting. I mean, the impact of COVID is not just an impact for the congregations and the church. There's society out there, and beginning with the polarization, the political that is moving over societal changes with Black Lives Matter, and then recessional fear, and that all is the transition around the organized religion and its institutions. And how little, of course I watch news, of course I have conversations, and with a German background I talk to friends all the time, and they hope that at some point the United States just pull the plug, unplug, count to 10, and then re-engage. But that's not how it works, right? But there's a desire of getting hold onto what truly matters. I think that's what it is. At the core is the desire of getting hold onto what really matters in all these transitions. And we as church or as religious institutions and religious leaders, I think we could play a clearer role in that. And I have not figured out what that might look like.
Great. In this place that I've landed, in the place that I left, and in part of what either you've said or a little bit about, of course, what I know about where you are and what you do, there is communities of faith still seem to articulate a desire for balance, stability, homeostasis for the long term. And in the traditional language, that's expressed as we are searching for, or the end outcome of this is the new minister, the new rabbi, the new clergy leader, and that represents stability, balance, homeostasis for a season, for this long season. And I wonder if that's also what you are often hearing. I wonder if perhaps one step in this direction, and I love that word. I love, Karen, your sense of, so what perhaps is essential. So maybe what is essential perhaps the good news here is, community of faith, you are invited into the being and the doing of your core purpose. And you will have stability and homeostasis and balance for as long as that particular core purpose is lively and deeply glad and truly advancing and impacting. And as soon as that's not the case, then there is disequilibrium in a good way, so that you will again find that core where there will be another bit of time where there is balance. And that's not at all about searching and hiring, calling, installing another clergy leader. That's about dancing in this. So Christians, kind of mainline Christians might say, that's about, using my language now, that's about engaging all of the time in being and doing the way of Jesus, which creates moments of balance and equilibrium, and is also essentially unbalancing and not stasis, because it's iterative and it's alive. But the core itself is the stability place. The conviction and fidelity to the core is the thing that says, we're all good.
Arlen, I think I'm reading between the lines here, but the only thing that doesn't change is change. But the gospel message behind it is the stable center. Is that kind of
Sure. I mean, if it's Christocentric, it's the gospel message. If it is a UUA congregation, which is really fully kind of grounded in the good and ultimate concern, where God is not, and that's still a core. If it is, a synagogue whose purpose is really more about one's Jewishness rather than one's practice of religiosity, there is still a core. So whatever that ultimate purpose is, maybe that's the good news around what it means to dance in this 21st century.
Right. Well,
in a different frame for saying, how do we do our work, and what does it mean when the next person comes? There's a different expectation set up. There's a different, okay, I'll stop again. You want to jump in, Margaret? Yeah.
Yeah. So whether you're Christocentric or centered on a set of values or the value of love, or call it God, call it spirit, what I'm finding in the congregations I work with these days is, we teach that Bullard model, or the Adizes model, in which you've got vision and relationship and program and management, or the other words for those. What I'm finding is that it's not about vision, it's about relationship. And that, especially coming out of COVID, and even if I think about the early church, the house churches, right? That was about relationship and about a shared emphasis on the shared and not on the vision, right? And on people are hungry to be together, and they're wanting to welcome more people into the circle. They're wanting to practice what I just learned to call preemptive radical inclusion. They want to reach out to each other, but it really is all about relationship. And I find that interesting because I didn't hear that as clearly before COVID, but now it really seems to be what's missing in people's lives and what they're looking for from church.
And just as a coda, and Adizes argues, Adizes' initial model argued that it is what Bullard calls vision, what Adizes would call entrepreneurial purpose, is always leads. That's foundational. And he rethought that a few years ago to say it is the integrative energy, the relationship energy, that is foundational, so that the entrepreneurial or the vision, it becomes a tangible and organic doing that flows from relationship.
I'm glad that Adizes and I ended up in the same place. That's very cool.
Very cool. Very cool. So, okay. So what?
Sorry, that was me.
Yeah, go.
Rather than what I'm sensing where I'm serving now is it's not as much the desire to be in a relationship as the fear of not being in one. And there's a fear of being left out or being abandoned or being whatever, but it feels less positive. It feels like it's a fearful reaction rather than we're together for a reason. It's I don't want to be left out.
See that too. I would definitely agree with that. And I'm thinking about your earlier comment, Arlen, about the core.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that in our congregations everyone agrees on the core, or that the core is that faithful element of being Christ-centric or value-centric or whatever it is. I think that however they define it, I think that core is I don't want to be alone. the core is the fear of not being in relationship with anyone. And that's what keeps our churches in transition so much, is because people are so hungry to be together, but they kind of don't know how anymore, because we are sharing more and more of ourselves. As we learned earlier today, when we talk about our stories, people are coming as their own authentic selves and bringing that intersectionality that you mentioned. And it's butting up against what people knew as their core values a long time ago. Nice. Or as what the church was and what the core was. But it's like, wait a minute, this doesn't quite agree with what I learned growing up in church, but I don't want to not be in relationship with people. So can I pretend I agree? Can I fake it till I make it? Or, and then in that case, the church is looking at, well, wait a minute, we're losing our center. We're kind of trying to accommodate this big thing, which can be a good thing. It's drawing the circle wider. That can be a really good thing, but it creates, or it perpetuates, that feeling of instability for some folks. As you're drawing the circle ever wider, they're like, wait a minute, this is wobbly. I wanted it to be close and narrow and sure, and you're making it unstable. So yes. I hear all these things moving around in that.
Lovely.
Can I jump in here a little bit too?
Please.
I really resonate a lot with the direction this conversation is going. I think that a lot of the times we undervalue our biology too much, and we forget that underneath everything that's in our minds and our hearts and our spirits is our biology. And at our core, we are social mammals. Our society, or our survival, depends on our not being alone. We cannot survive alone. And I think there's an impulse underneath everything that is coming closer and closer to the surface, because there's so much stress and uncertainty in the world, that some of what is driving us is the impulse beneath our minds and our emotionality and our spirits. If you want to, call those things that inform how we have organized ourselves and how we live. And I think some of the anxiety that's driving our congregations now is informed by some of that, the stress that flows like a current, because nothing feels safe anymore. Nothing feels secure. Nothing feels, I think, to people like things that we can count on. Even something as simple as being and I'm going to speak from the term of an American. I think other nations probably have something like this United States of America. We're very clear that we're not really united anymore. That, and that's a piece of it as well. The social fabric that has informed culture for so long is disintegrating. So all of those things inform our context and drive what's going on in every aspect of life, including church.
Tom, back to you, perhaps, or Zach, you're ready to jump.
Well, your original kind of the mixture of what is a settled pastor, transitional. The context that I'm in here, which the pastor was here during the pandemic, and I gave a whole lot of grace to the stories I was hearing of what was going on. There was the pastor who was here didn't go with I'm just going to put it this way, did not have the capacity to go with the flow a whole lot. Okay. And so, I kind of bob and weave all the time. And I think there's a fear that they will not get a settled pastor who will continue to bob and weave with them. That whole idea of the change being, we're in a fluid situation now, so that the idea of the transition, that kind of fluidity, that needs to be the norm rather than the transition piece, because we're always in transition. Does that kind of making sense to you? So your original thing about the, those 2 yards that are kind of like, I don't even know if there's really that hedge line in between at all. The congregations are looking for that ability to kind of go with the flow, because we don't. The stability is, hey, we're gonna go left now. Okay, well, help us go left, and now we need to go right. That's at least this congregation that I'm at right now, which is kind of, right after we're kind of coming back to a more of a sense of normality. It's bobbing and weaving, and one cannot overestimate the political shiftings that are going on around us, as a part of that. So, but I'm kind of wondering if now your original statement that hedge line just really kind of is not there, that the stable pastor is the one that can actually go with the flow, and if you just stay still, you're just going to get swept out under by the current. So,
thank you. Up to Tom.
A couple of years before COVID, I went back and was reviewing a body of literature in religious education and Christian education that's called Community of Faith Model. And in that, community is the content, process, and outcome of faith formation. Now, there's different theorists who do say there's different processes for that, different visions of what what genuine community is, and therefore what is different content and different outcome. But throughout COVID, I was musing on how will we reconstruct communities? How will we reconstruct's not the right word. How will we be forming communities after COVID? Because there will definitely be a push to go back to the way it was. I know transition's enough, but there's always that desire. Can we go back to the flesh pots of Egypt? Because the old way was so comfortable and familiar. And in what ways can we invest in new ways of being community? I listened to a church member talking to a visitor. So what's bringing you back to church now? Oh, I'd like to have more community. Oh, why don't you come to our fellowship hour? And I don't think that was the community the visitor was trying to say they were looking for. I think we use community culturally to mean so many different things. There's a condominium being built near me that is describing it as the great community. I don't think they mean it the same way that I would say it in worship. And so I think people are coming to religious organizations seeking community, but they don't know how to describe what they're looking for. I think that too is part of the transitions we're all experiencing. The way we form and nurture community is very different post-COVID than it was before COVID. And before COVID, it was very different than what we could do in the 90s or the 60s or any other era.
Yeah.
And have we been prepared to do these different forms of being God's people?
A thread that I'm listening to, it's how lovely. The way I jotted it down is: are we perhaps talking about for our own practice, and then so in our own practice and in our modeling, our incarnating, if I can use that fancy word, quality I think we're talking about quality of relationship.
I go back to the work of Peter Block, which is not new, but foundational. I mean, he talked about the community, the structure of belonging, and that it's not something, yes, we are social mammals, and yes, we absolutely require community simply for survival. And at the same time, we don't know how to do it. We're not born knowing how to do it. And especially with the demands of what some researchers call homophily, that we birds of a feather flock together, right? But we're living in an increasingly diverse world. So how do you intentionally create connection? How do you intentionally create an accountability to an agreement for how we will be together? We call it covenant. Other people call it other things. And I think that one of the roles of faith communities is teaching people those core skills of living in community and helping them live it and model it, because they come seeking togetherness. They come seeking a place where they can really be themselves, where they can find their place, where they can find guidance and structure or freedom, or whatever they're looking for. So I think that I feel like I have a mandate, if I'm going to be a faith leader, to help congregations learn to teach people to live in community, right? To learn how to model living in an accountable community that's centered on love, centered on value, centered on living the way of Jesus, whatever that center is, and being a kind of a learning laboratory for living in community.
So if that's a lovely and a more expansive way of saying, if this work is about being and doing, teaching and equipping quality of relationships, of belonging, then that is different than that. I think that creates a slightly different frame than we can't wait until the called minister arrives, because then we will be about the business of belonging and quality relationships. Right now, we're not really about that. This is interim time. We are obviously about something else. Or, to the extent that you have some judicatory, some executive level person or group that is saying, here your lane is interim, and you will make the way for the one who is permanent, called, settled, whatever terminology works for you. And that is language that creates, that could sort of say, one of you is doing this kind of work, and the other one is going to end up doing this other kind of work, and it's the other kind of work which is lasting.
And I'll just say that great man approach to life, that when we have the right leader, we will be okay.
Yeah.
I think that's got a core fallacy. And I think that is something our congregations fall into again and again, because by our new minister, we will be saved. When we have a settled minister, we will be community. And it's hollow, in my opinion.
And we can get back to normal.
Whatever that is. Tom's got his hand up.
Yeah. So I would suggest then the work may center around engaging the congregation to articulate, to bring from tacit to conscientious attention cores of community. community as practice, community as value, community as organizational structure.
Mm-hmm.
Those, I think, are different interim tasks than what I was initially taught.
Yes. Yes.
So Arlen and I are both part of the group that is working to puzzle out what is the what is the successor IMN curriculum? What should we be teaching? And this is really a dance around values. What is the work of congregational life? What is the work of transition? What is the work of transformation? And the conversation we're having here may not be completely aligned with the conversation that a bishop might be having around what do I want you to go in and do to get ready for, to get them ready for the next seventh leader. So it really is a fascinating dance around what is the faith community? What is church? How do we survive? How do we not just survive, but how do we thrive into the next century? And there's no clear answer.
Yeah. A quick story to illustrate the belonging and relationship piece, because I'm forever surprised in the moment, and then not surprised really, because it's happened in its own way before. So Sunday was my first worship in person with these folks. I had attended worship, but had not had any leadership responsibility. So I preached. I was the person who was the through thread for worship, and they have a spot in the service where the children meet with the clergy and have a few minutes of conversation. And when that time came, they met me down on the carpet runner, which is a center aisle carpet runner, and we all sat down on the floor together. And after worship, there were several persons who said, we can't remember the last time the pastor sat down on the floor with the children in worship and engaged them. And it wasn't just that which was surprising. It was that after the little children's time was done, there was spontaneous clapping in the sanctuary. And I didn't understand, of course, what that meant. But then several said what they said afterwards. And what they were clapping about was, I think, kind of the holy glee of, here is one who is in relationship with those children who we adore and honor, and they are adoring and honoring our children. And how sweet is that? It's about belonging and about relationship. And that is indeed, I think, over and over again, the core, part of the core. Everything flows from that, or nothing flows from that. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's not about charisma. It's, the great man theory. So I was just thinking, it's not about charisma. It's about vulnerable, incarnating, being oneself. Yeah, Tom. Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought for a minute you had that arm flashed up. So back down to Connie, what else is bubbling up for you? Over to Zach, perhaps. Up to Wayne. We've got about 12 minutes, 15 minutes or so. I think we're done at quarter after, but I'm always aware that time can fly.
I'll just, to go along with your story you just told, that I'm in Williston, North Dakota, which is, North Dakota is as warm as you would think. It was 40 below in my first month when I got here in January. But the people are very warm, and my first service, I just kind of did my normal thing. This is like a cathedral church. It's got the pulpit is 100 feet from the first row. It's way up high, and I just came right down to the front row, and I'm just kind of there with the people. And then it came to passing of the peace, and I'm still doing from COVID. I do the fist bump, and I say, "Hey, don't you want to go to a church where you can punch the preacher every Sunday?" And I go all the way down and around. And that was what people reacted to more than anything else, because the previous pastor never came off the high horse.
Yeah, lovely.
So that kind of all tracks with exactly what you're saying there. And again, some of that just engagement with people, and like, well, what do you want to do? Pastor, you're here now. What do we do? What do you want to do? And even to this day, we've got a preschool, and they're talking about the church across the way. They have a coffee house, and then another church has a coffee house, and the adults who drop off their kids go to the coffee house. We should have a coffee house. I said, do you ever think of just going to these adults that are dropping off their kids and say, what would you want? Just, instead of making an assumption, just ask them what they want. I think, wow, that's a really incredible idea. I go, not really, but okay, So just some of the engagement, just in some ways, being a human being in community with other humans, I guess is, and maybe that is odd coming out of COVID for one thing, but also if you come out of that whole thing, the higher end idea of pastor, the hair pastor kind of model from years past, where you come in and dictate, this is what we will do. So, I don't know.
Good.
but
a similar experience to yours, Arlen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I'm in the second year of a 2-year interim, and I can see the freedom in them. When I wrote my first interim evaluation, I said, this is a congregation that just wants to have joy.
Mm.
And they haven't. For whatever reason, like they've kept things, we're in a university town with a lot of intellectuals, and we must be like this. And I'm like, you can still be an intellectual and have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Can we laugh? Can we do this? Or, somebody makes a mistake. Oops, that doesn't sound right. Let's try that again. Or we're in the middle of the service, and I might say, we're going to change the order of service because I think we need to spend more time doing this. And we're not going to sing that last hymn. We're going to do whatever. And I think there's a lightening up that comes with that feeling that does create community in more ways. And what's important for me, what I hope doesn't get lost, is to include the rest of the religious professionals in that. So many of our church staff worked just as hard as we did trying to hold congregations together over COVID. And they're burnt out too. And they're tired too, just like clergy. So I'm trying to bring joy for the staff so that they can feel reinvigorated and excited again about their jobs at a time when, let's face it, our older members are dying off and younger members don't have the same financial abilities because they're dealing with student loans and childcare and all that stuff. So, the last study I heard was that it takes 6 new donors to make up one elderly congregant who passes away. So it's probably more like 10 now.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we do to help staff at a time when they're not sure they're going to get paid? Churches are having to cut back. They're being asked to make more, do more with less. So I think it's really, really critical that we, be humble, be flexible, and bring joy to all that we do. That goes a long way toward building community.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go to your church.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We have fun.
Yeah, Connie, I find myself tapping into that with the whole notion of Sabbath, my own, because in the craziness that I'm expected to lead, if I'm not tending to that and saying, no, I'm not working today, and no, I'm not answering your phone call, and no, I'm not, and to say to my staff who are exceptionally gifted but overfunction, to say, no, go home. And they look at me like, I'm serious. It'll be here tomorrow. Go home. You know, my admin is remarkable, but her son was coming home and hadn't been home in almost a year and a half. I said, why are you here? Well, but go home. And to model that that's okay. And when congregants ask me, well, why didn't this get done? Well, because I spent an hour with the Lord this morning sitting in a sanctuary. What? Yeah, that's an option. You can do that. I'll open the building for you if you need to get over there. But it's that back to the core, Arlen, or however you want to phrase that. But the community thing for me is a result of the core, not a way to the core.
Mm-hmm.
I need the core first so I know where the community's gathered. And it's got to be, I keep thinking about, here's my Christocentric, I keep thinking about Jesus walking across the water and Peter saying, can I come out there? Or the storm and they're scared to death. And Jesus, what are you worried about? Would you just calm down? and those two images in my history kind of just go, take a breath. I know it's crazy, but God's got this. Take a breath. I don't know how. I don't know what it's going to cost us. But in the end, I believe God's got this.
If for a moment, with pencil and paper or whatever you've got that scribbling on, perhaps name something that you will be and do around advancing this sensibility. What will you be and do that will advance this sensibility? And you'll do it perhaps in like one box in your conversation with leadership around that community of faith. And perhaps in this other box, it's in conversation with whoever is in your world, executive, judicatory, institutional guide and deciders around the shape and understanding of what is so-called interim and transitional time. Because I think what we all are indeed talking about is a kind of posture and attention to some things that will happen during intentional interim time and will happen beyond intentional interim time. They'll happen all of the time. So what do you want to pay attention to that perhaps you are and you just want to put an exclamation point on it? Or perhaps you haven't been, and because of this conversation, you're saying, yeah, I'm leaning in there. And what is perhaps an opening move with a judicatory who perhaps is not viewing this at all in this way? For them, the hedge is still quite high. It's almost like those ancient Scottish or English labyrinths, right? You get in there and you can get lost. So thick you cannot see through from one side to the other. And if you've named it, is there something that is like something that's going to hinder that from taking place. And it's not, I'm not asking about what is the outside danger. I'm saying for yourself, what will hinder that? What will hinder you from making that move? Karen, did you grab a little of that enough to share if you're willing? What's your move? Still working.
Yep, still working.
Okay. Catherine, are you ready?
Sure. So I've really appreciated this conversation because it's really an affirmation of the work I've been doing with the church I'm working with right now. I've been working very differently in some ways, but being very intentional, especially using new metrics for vitality and quote unquote success. And I've been looking at things like relationship, engagement, willingness to risk innovation. So, and that all feels very resonant with what we were talking about here. Oh, the judicatory, man. Wayne's laughing because
I'm it.
So, one of the things the judicatory thinks about me is that I take too long. And, but really that comes from just feeling like this work is very deep and wanting to do this piece of it well. And, I think if there was going to be a move with the judicatory, man, Wayne, I'd love to sit down and have lunch one of these days and talk about this, because I think this has been really rich. And but Wayne and I have a good relationship, so okay. It's the rest of the judicatory that can be tough. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, but it's about the transition. We get a new bishop in the spring.
Okay. So if we can, we have 10 minutes to get everybody's voice in, perhaps. So, Catherine, would you invite a colleague?
Sure. How about you, Zach? Zach and I went to seminary together. It's good to see you.
Well,
it's your 90 second dump, Zach.
I'm at a weird congregation. I've never been at a congregation that owns a huge bunch of property and has a $10 million trust fund and has no financial problems. And wow. But this was the biggest pain in the butt to this synod, and the bishop has told me, do whatever you want to. He said, I was getting 5 phone calls a week. They were a pain in my butt, taking up 95% of my time. He said, the week after you got there, that I'll quit. He said, so you do whatever you want to do there. The main problem, I'm in North Dakota. And any of you want to come to North Dakota, just off the top of your head? Any of you want to come to Williston, North Dakota, which is almost to Montana and almost to Canada, that far north and west, and that's the big pull to try to get somebody else to come here. It's a great place. I'm from North Carolina, though, and I just soon get back to North Carolina. So for the congregation itself, them to continue to be flexible. They've got an opportunity to buy property right next door to the church, and we had an executive meeting in between stuff here talking about it. And you'd think they're going to buy the property. They were talking about putting a parking lot on it, and different people are talking about, we could put low income housing and put a food pantry and they've gotten to the point where they're like, you know what? We don't have to decide that right now. Let's get the property. Maybe we turn it to a parking lot initially, and we can go with the flow and see what comes up later on. So that whole idea of just, we don't have to make a firm decision that just stays forever. We can kind of go with it here. The judicatory thing, got to make North Dakota more attractive to folks.
Okay. So. Would you invite a colleague?
Oh, Tom, you and I've been together or otherwise today. I'll toss it to you.
Thanks, and it's been good to be with you several times today, Zach. I've been doing some writing around some of these ideas of community of faith and interim work, and I haven't really shared them, so it's time to find some ways to share that. For me, it's the barriers are not adjudicatory. They're very much in support of all the ideas. But we're a denomination where autonomy of the local congregation is sacrosanct. So no matter what they think, they can't get it into congregations. The barrier is getting some congregations to take a risk on this. And that's where I'm still working. And I think I'll be working there for a while because that's the nature of our denomination right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Connie, will you share?
Yeah, I was thinking the exact same thing, that the hindrance is not the Unitarian Universalist Association, it's our congregations. Mm-hmm. It's their anxiety and fear around change, their resistance. They want it so badly, but they're so afraid to let go and try something different. And that's, it's in turns frustrating and heartbreaking that they're so close to wanting to, and then, oh, nope, this is too far from where we used to be. And, that thought that it could be like it used to be, like it's gone. It's never coming back. Physiologically, you can't be who you were. So why do you think you couldn't make your community be what it was? For me, what is the thing I need to be or do? I think it's to stay prayerful, stay close to my spiritual core. Because you can't, someone said this earlier, we were talking about boundaries and taking the day off and that stuff. It's like, you can't serve from an empty vessel. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the thing I have to do is practice good self-care. And just keep loving them. Even when they make it hard, we just keep loving. So I will call on Wayne from my hometown, Philadelphia.
Ooh, I didn't know that.
Yep.
I know something new. I think the core choice is to keep my own anxiety down so that I can preach, keep your anxiety down. If I'm not there, then the words are empty. And so that's the first piece. The other piece, because of the hat that I wear in my judicatory, is it occurs to me that the different players in the system don't agree on what the objective is. What's the objective of an interim? And we're in a tricky spot. We have 141 congregations and 39 of them are in transition. And we've got six full-time interims available. I just don't have enough resources to cover the ground. It's just not there. And so what's that going to look like? And I think in Southeast Pennsylvania, we've got 30% more congregations than we really need, but we don't have the polity to close them. So it's another dynamic. But for me, it's going to be keep the anxiety down and just keep preaching God's got this. Karen, I guess you're what's left.
Yeah, first I'd like to echo pretty much what Catherine said on the depth of the conversation. And I also cherish it a lot. And that leads me to paying more attention to making space for this kind of conversation, where there is not a goal set for what the outcome of the conversation should be, right? But just talk, because we need the space to kind of let the spirit flow, and also allow myself to go to areas I never thought of. And that entails kind of what I scribbled down is that I'd like to pay more attention to transitions individuals are going through. So it's pastoral care, but not just that. And then see how that impacts the community that is also in transition, made up of all these individualized cases, if you will, but the individualized approach is not what community is all about, right? So you need to have it in a coherent system, which in this case I would call the body of Christ. But then also the body of Christ is embedded into the world, right? So the world is going through transitions as well. So how does the body of Christ impact the world in a way that would allow for healthier relationships overall? That's,
lovely.
You do with it what you want.
Lovely. Yeah. Margaret?
Maybe one last question to Tom. If you said previously that you kind of sense that the historic pattern is moving towards, you said the 20th century, right?
The very beginning of the 20th century. I think it's actually going more towards the late 19th. Yeah.
Okay. But isn't that the time when the role of the pastor was Herr Pastor?
In some places, yes.
Yes.
It's also a time in U.S. Christian education of the great Sunday school conventions.
Oh, okay.
And the beginning of the uniform lesson plans, which is eerily similar to the narrative lectionary that so many people think is brand new now.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as I'm listening to all this, I'm thinking about the congregation, the main one I serve, and the reality, the core reality that I don't think I can change after 4 years of working with them on all sorts of things is that they're basically afraid of each other. There's been so much hurt that when they talk about doing something new and they start to get really excited about it, and then they stop and they say, we're just going to get attacked if we try this. And it again and again, I've seen it. The most creative, the most loving people just get stopped, and they're just completely disempowered by the sense that they're going to get attacked. And that breaks my heart, because they're such wonderful people, and yet this fear just it disables them. And for myself, I have to start doing less. For one thing, I have to leave in 7 months, and we've cut the hours on 2 staff positions. So I've ended up picking up more responsibilities, but then I kept all the other things I was already doing, and all the interim stuff and all the social justice stuff, and it's all compelling, and I've just got to do less. And we've got to figure out a way to realign the work so that a human being who might be in a relationship or have a family could do it. Because I'm single, I'm solo, I can work all the time. That's not fair to my successor. So, and probably not very healthy for me. So, yeah. So I have to. I'm working on it. But it's a complicated process.
Mm. Mm. Well, we've done it. We've done it, friends. We're at and a little bit beyond the time limit. I have spent my entire life not my entire adulthood trying to not emulate one of my family of origin rules. And one of those family of origin rules has to do with the principle of the thing is more important than the relationship.
Mm.
And I have spent my adulthood trying to undo that curse, because that's a curse. And so my ongoing work, and I'm feeling finally at a point in my life where maybe I get it somewhat in balance rather than almost always so far out of balance, that I am able to pay attention to the quality of relationship with some decent measure, where years ago it was never with enough of a measure, because I think at the end of the day, what we've talked about just seems solid, doesn't it? That if a community heals or works at healing, in Margaret's case, not being afraid of one another, or if a community tackles and answers the big bucket questions in their life, that is all in relationship to the quality of their belonging, to one another, and their belonging to the holy, and their belonging to themselves. And I think that's the shift. Now, I say shift, right? For some of us in the room, it's not a shift; it's the lived reality. But and for all of us, we watch communities of faith who would experience that still as somewhat of a shift. Wow. And so we'll just have to reconvene at some point and figure out what we're living into, or just be able to celebrate that some of us have been living and being and doing as perhaps early adapters in the big scheme of things. It'd be wonderful one day where this is normative, where transitions beyond the interim time, there's no need to talk about it that way. There's just transition that's tied to a thing that is about belonging and core. And everyone feels enough balance and safety and at home to flourish and blossom and bloom.
Amen to that.
Amen.
Harlan, thank you for your grace, your wisdom, and your ability to bring amazing questions.